Hello, everybody. We had some technical difficulties, but you know what? We got through them. We fought through them, and now we're here to tell you about charts. I am Jason
Shots.
Snell, and he is Dan Moren. We are your Six Colors chartologists today.
Jason in Boston, we call them chats.
Chats?
Chats.
Do you have a chat about cars and Harvard Yard?
Yeah, well, I have a chat about my tchotchkes.
Oh,
It's a
interesting.
big collection of tchotchkes. I need charts for it.
Go to Fenway Park, have a
I'm Fenway
chat
Park
about
for some tchotchkes and the chat.
home runs, and I'm trying to think of a baseball term that I can do that with, and I don't know. RBIs.
RBIs, yeah.
There you
And
go. No, but enough about that because we have serious business. Apple results. What could be more serious than a business that in a okay, Dan, how would you phrase the as a, put on your analyst hat here?
sure.
Was
I
this
some right here.
a disappointing quarter or was this a better than expected quarter?
Jason, I always want to say I feel there's a lot of opportunity in the business, and everything is upside. That we can do better in everything. That's not an answer, as you might know. Uh,
You sound very much like Tim Cook.
Thank you. Uh,
Tim, you were recently in India. Tell me how you feel about India. Well, I was recently in India and it's
yeah,
great.
yeah.
Okay,
Didn't mention the
great.
Mac SE once. Very disappointed.
Yeah, I know, right? He had that opportunity there too.
It was just softball. I think. I mean, better than expected is certainly how Apple qualified it, and certainly better than the predictions that were going around the financial community in many places, though not every place. I think they had predicted better Mac sales and slightly better iPad sales, and those were kind of the two dim spots in the lineup for obvious reasons. But I think what's fascinating most of all to me about the way that they present their results in the last several quarters is they've I don't want to say invented, but they like having this. They have this parallel reality where there's the constant currency parallel reality where it's like,
Hmm.
well, next door in the multiverse, we're doing great because the currency is even and we are taking off. And I find that hilarious because it's like saying, yes, if we hadn't lost all that money, we made a lot of money. If you don't still look at it that way, look at it the way that we made money. So it's they did fine. They're not in. This is not going to hurt them long term, and it's really not that bad. It seems like I think it was overblown. I think.
Yeah, I actually said on Mac Break Weekly yesterday they put me on the spot about how I thought, or I guess Tuesday, about how I thought I was going to do, and I expected that they would have a number that would be between last year's and the year before, like 90 billion in revenue, and it was more than that. I mean, it was really quite a gentle. So what I'm saying is I think it's very much a better than expected given because I think the expectations are it was going to be a bad quarter, and
Right.
instead it was one of those without expectations. You might say it was a weak for Apple quarter, but weak for Apple still is generating mid 90s billion in
Billions of
revenue,
dollars. Yes.
and they said they also said that in the parallel universe that they have constructed that they had growth like all regions, all products, something like
Right.
that. It was
Right. Well,
wild.
and I mean, they did have a lot of places where legitimately, they had impressive results. I thought at one point they said something about it was India, maybe Indonesia, where they like doubled year over year. I mean, granted, I think they were coming from sales that were not high, right? So doubling your sales when they're pretty low isn't that big a deal, especially when you put someplace like India where it's like you've made big inroads in the last year. But they did have a bunch of places where they set records in a lot of other markets: Mexico, Philippines, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, etc. And I think that it's interesting to see like when the U.S. is potentially soft, and I think Europe was kind of down a little bit too, but like other places were way up. Like
That's
both I
right.
think Japan and other Asia Pacific were both way up this quarter. So
They said they did really well in
yeah,
emerging markets, and that especially with the iPhone, and that the softness in the U.S. was offset by
I
emerging markets.
and maybe some of it is just that again the strong dollar, right? Like so much of in the U.S. people are cutting back because of inflation and things being more expensive, but that's not a universal or a global phenomenon, I should say, so much as it doesn't hit other countries the way it hits the U.S. necessarily. So it may be an opportunity in those cases for people who had not been customers before to become customers.
Right, exactly. Well, I mean, while we're talking about it, I'm going to flip over to our little chart view here so everybody else can see these charts that my number spreadsheet and my scripts made. Had some, Dan, I faced some technical headwinds today that I'll
Oh,
tell you about later.
but in an alternate universe, it was fine.
Yeah, if we're in a constant scripting world where AppleScript and shortcuts and OpenAI Whisper and Audio Hijack are all held constant, it was fine. They were not held constant. Anyway, that's for a story for the end of the video, maybe. But here's total Apple revenue chart so people can see what we're talking about in terms of this 94.8. Now, the way they do it is you compare against the year ago quarter, which is Q2 of 22, so 97.3, so down, and we'll see the percentage changes in that time. But I looked back to Q2 21 when they were just below 90, and I thought maybe they'll regress all the way, regress 2 years, essentially, which is, if you look back to Q2 of 20, it's 58, right?
Right.
So, like,
that's
what a
jump.
terrible quarter it is. But again, it has to do, it is down year over year if you're concerned about growth, given the macroeconomic headwinds, yada, yada, yada.
But when you look at that moving
bad.
average that you've put up now, right? Like that bounce, basically a pandemic bounce. I mean,
Yeah.
the question is,
And then flat.
zoom out long term enough. Is that a bubble or is that a slope, right? Like,
Yeah, and I think generally when you look at iPhone, what you get is there's a bounce up to a new. I mean, it's almost like, sorry for this, physicists, but it's almost like a quantum leap almost. It's like they're at a state, and then a brand new iPhone design comes out, and they go to a new state, and then they kind of like putter around in there for a while, and then what might happen is another new iPhone with a new design comes out, and like, whoop, and now they're up here now, and there's a or you could say there's a new normal, because like there were 3 or 4 years where they were just kind of like that line is kicking around like it is on the left side of the chart, and then 2020, late 2020 arrives, and up it goes, climbing to where we are now. So, but that is the question.
Maybe the next iPhone will be the iPhone Home, Jason.
I mean, maybe, probably not, but you never know. Let me flip over to total Apple profit is just for fun. For funsies, they talk about how much cash they're trying to get cash neutral. They do this by buying back a lot of stock, giving a lot of money just back to shareholders in dividends, and then there's the mad money that they spend on, I don't know, candy.
Total Apple profit, my favorite Apple RPG of all time podcast,
where you play Adrian Prophet.
Oh boy.
Who gets a job at Apple. Anyway, he lives in a cardboard box.
Yep.
Reference
knowledge.
Yep. So anyway, 24.2 billion in profit. Again, how does that compare to last year? Down slightly, but only slightly, and which brings us to that year-over-year revenue change slide, which is down 3%, which, again, I don't know. Apple, maybe they were sandbagging a little bit, but it felt to me like they were doing a lot of warning, unstable event, quarter difficult, and instead, it's 2 consecutive down year over year, but like by smaller amount here, decreasing
single digit. Yeah, I mean, not the Titanic going down or anything,
and also. I hate to say the tough compare thing, but they did have, if you see the fiscal 21 year over year revenue change, that is that spike that we were just talking about. And it's kind of hard to live that down. Like then they end up playing at that steady state for a couple of years. And then the question is, will they be flat forever now? Or are they going to have another spike, but maybe in fiscal 24?
It does mean potentially, depending on what the challenges are, right? If it is mainly economic environment and the economic environment changes next year, now they have a good compare because they were down.
The beauty of
so now you can come back up again. It's almost like there's a cycle.
That's the beauty of living your life based on comparisons to previous milestones instead of being viewed holistically. Must be nice. So that's that. Let's move on to one more. I've got one more general chart here, which is the pie chart. My one chart that I have to fix by hand because am not happy with how Numbers does it. 54% iPhone revenue. Just to remind everybody that when we talk about Mac and iPad numbers, it's, they are less than 10%. Wearables is less than 10%. I'll point out that we think of the three legs of the Apple stool as the iPhone, the Mac, and the iPad because those are its major platforms, and yet the Mac and the iPad are smaller than wearables and much smaller than services.
Don't use that stool to get anything off a high shelf.
Well, in fact, it's a five-legged stool, and one leg is much larger than the other four.
Yeah, it's bad news.
So
That's
it's
not
actually
a good,
pretty stable.
Not a well-made stool, though. I feel like
it lacks consistency.
But it is interesting to see the Mac, the iPad, and wearables basically all becoming, they're very close in terms of the amount of the business. It varies, right? Obviously, from quarter to quarter, depending on what products have come out during that quarter. But I think they all tend to hover around very similar percentages, right? I mean, the iPhone is the outlier here, right? And fascinating to think about, if the iPhone were to go away, then Apple is a services company.
Yeah, although I mean, the truth is the services are so attached to the iPhone, and the iPhone is flooding. I mean, there were a bunch of questions on the analyst call today about sort of like install base and ecosystem and all those things, because Apple has really primed them to think of the company in that way. But what you end up getting is our stuff, I think Tim Cook even said basically, our stuff works really well together. So you buy an iPhone and then you start subscribing to our services, and then you buy a Mac, and then you buy an iPad, and then you buy an Apple Watch, and they do that a lot, where they got to crack into that house with some product, an iPhone maybe. And then suddenly it's like, why don't I buy an iPad? And then it just kind of keeps rolling like that. And the services all accrue to that too. We have some great services charts coming up. Everybody stay tuned for that.
Everybody's favorite.
But first, it turns out I can scroll to the next slide. Great, Mac revenue. So the Mac had a really great run. It's all over. Shut it down. No, I think the idea is that the Mac pulled a bunch of sales forward with the pandemic and with the Apple Silicon transition, and now it's got to compare to, like in this case, the M1 MacBook Pro release, which was a lot of pent up demand for a non-Intel MacBook Pro. And these numbers, again, these numbers are really great. These numbers are all-time Mac highs like 3 years ago, but they had such a huge run in 2021-22 that now the Mac sales figures are going down to a more modest level. Still $7.2 billion in Mac sales.
Right. I mean, this is a quarter where there were new Macs, which is worth noting. But they were also not necessarily the Macs that were people were super jazzed about, right? These are, the Mac Mini, even getting the M2 Pro, which is great, but it's not something that was going to drive a ton of sales.
A lot of people bought M1 Pros, right? And so,
a lot of people bought M1 Pros. So, yeah, I think it much in the same way that the M1 was a huge leap over the Intel Macs that came before it. Everything else is going to be a little bit more incremental going forward, and that includes technology and sales.
Year-over-year Mac revenue change numbers, just to show it here. Yeah, it looks terrible, but again, I point you to the previous numbers that were so high. You're setting the bar very high. It is not living up to those yet, but I'm not worried that Mac sales are crashing. In fact, I think everybody sort of accepts the fact that Apple Silicon and the pandemic really kind of drove Mac sales. And they would say, I think they said, Mac install base is still huge. So really this is a matter of they're taking a little bit of a hit here in terms of growth because there was sort of pent up demand plus demand caused by the pandemic in the early days. And so they're feeling a little bit. But the Mac still seems to be in a pretty solid place, better than it's been in a long time.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And it's a like the iPad, which we'll talk about in a moment. It is a device that gets probably refreshed less frequently than other devices.
Yeah. I mean, there were times with the iPad where I would look at numbers like this and I would despair and I'd be like, oh God, the iPad's just never going to break through. And the Mac, I just don't feel that way about it because I think we all kind of know why these numbers look like they do, and that it's because they were so successful recently, and you can't grow your potential market that fast. And they into the existing market plus a little bit of growth had a huge amount of sales for the Apple Silicon transition, and now they got to kind of eat it.
Yeah, well, I mean, 40 years almost of a product line, it's not going to disappear overnight. It's got some longevity to it, and they're willing to weather bad performance when it does occur because the market is very up and down for the Macs, right? Like it's very much like sometimes you get a good one and sometimes you don't.
David Schaub says, success is a double-sided blade which you keep cutting yourself with. Yes.
Stop it.
Welcome
Stop
to
doing that.
welcome to Wall Street. You could be a Wall Street analyst. All right, moving on to the iPad. iPad revenue, 6.7 billion.
And a little bit.
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, again,
the iPad has not had a lot going for. I mean, they pointed out it's a tough compare. They had the M1 iPad Air last year in the same quarter. The iPad, I think, has suffered from a product line that they don't really know what they're doing with right now, and that kind of shows because, again, the hardware has so outpaced the software that I think a lot of people are like, my hardware continues to be great, right? My iPad continues to function very well. I'm not in any rush to replace it, and they haven't come up with a compelling reason to in the last several years. So I expect that to kind of hold steady, but it may decline a little bit. That seems about right, and that's what our chart is showing us, right? It's been pretty steady over the last couple of years with some ups and downs, and may continue in that fashion. But I don't think I think it'll probably bounce back from the lows this quarter.
Yeah, and I think you're seeing that same effect. Even at a bigger scale, there's no Apple Silicon transition for the iPad, but there is a pandemic pull forward, and I think you see it where I think the iPad is a very successful product, and there are a lot of them out there. And then it came to lockdowns starting in 2020, and people doing more stuff online, and people are like, "Oh, I should probably get a new iPad, or maybe I should get an iPad. There's a place for it in my life." And you see it in the chart. Really, you see it in the chart starting in 2020, where the 4-quarter moving average black line just kind of goes up, and then it's flat. And first off, flat, not bad. But also I think this is the idea that they sold a lot in a short period of time, and the iPad does not feel, to your point, Dan, like the kind of product where if you sleep on a new iPad, for a year, you're like, oh geez, I can't believe the iPad has grown and changed so much in a year, because it hasn't. That's not how it works. So.
Yep.
All right, year-over-year iPad revenue change. There it is. Again, it's the same sort of like gusty wind, not to use a different wind metaphor from the one that everybody uses.
Crosswind?
But this is this is that there was the huge accelerated burst, and then you kind of come off the high. All right, iPhone. It's big. It's blue. 51.3 billion. Pretty good, right?
Yeah.
Like that's actually that is a Q2 iPhone revenue record.
I am surprised about it.
Golf clap.
I just
in the back quarter.
I don't know what's driving that. Was it just maybe like pent up demand from people who didn't buy basically in the holiday season? We're like, oh, I guess I could afford a new iPhone.
Yeah, well, I mean, there was some deferral. I suspect from the fact that they until late in last quarter they couldn't sell enough iPhone Pro models. Yep. They couldn't make them enough to sell them. There was demand that they were not fulfilling. There was a hint in the call today that this is also, like I mentioned earlier, emerging markets being stronger. That there's although there's some weakness in maybe some of the richer markets do their iPhone buying very early in the cycle, whereas some of the emerging markets they take their time. And but they're building up a base there. I don't know, but it's a very good number for Apple's most important product, and it really does change this from being an arguably bad quarter to being right? Because the most important product, the two most important categories for Apple, iPhone and services, both were up.
Yep.
And records.
Yeah, it really anchors it. I mean, I think whatever reason they did so well this quarter, whether it was the people who couldn't buy it because they couldn't make them fast enough, or people buying them for other outside of holiday seasons. Maybe it's the yellow iPhone.
Yeah. I was
Could be any of those things.
Listener Mahir with a very insightful piece of analysis, which is asking the question, is it the new yellow iPhone? That's
Good answer as any.
Clearly, that's it. Anyway, here's the year-over-year revenue change, which again, you might look at this and be like, oh, they had that big burst. But again, it's what we've been saying. They had the big burst. And then I feel like this is the iPhone cycle, right? Which at least for the last couple, which is year one of a new design, big boost. Year two, slight. Year three, kind of flat. The question is, the rumors suggest that this fall's iPhone is not going to be a dramatic redesign like it was 3 years ago and 3 years before that. And I wonder what that will do. But still, again, 2% growth, while on this chart not looking
Yeah.
fantastic, given the context of where we are right now, that it's a positive number is pretty good. But
And it makes a strategic sense, kind of based on what we know they've just been through from a like manufacturing perspective. Is maybe don't change it up very much if we're already struggling to deal with like fulfilling inventories from our
could be.
current models. Changing the whole production line now may slow things down a lot, and yeah. So.
Also, we may just be exiting the monolithic new iPhone every 3 years world, because we are now in a world where there is an iPhone and an iPhone Pro, and it may be that there are some rumors. I think the big rumor for this fall is not that they're going to completely redesign all the phones, but that iPhone Pro Max or iPhone Max or iPhone Ultra or whatever it is, the highest end one, is going to have like the periscope camera,
Right.
and it's going to be the best iPhone camera of all time. And if that's true, then maybe this is their ability to say, we're going to start rolling things out every year in a different part of the lineup, doing new stuff, moving it down in the lineup. So we may not have, maybe they won't ever again do the thing where they kind of like sweep their arm and go like, new iPhones are now completely different. And instead it's going to be a little more piecemeal, like it is with the iPad and the Mac line too.
16 years in, it is hard to keep, even every 3 years, it's hard to keep reinventing.
Completely
the wheel.
reinvent.
Yeah.
Well, what you do is and if anybody noticed, they really kind of went back to the iPhone 5 design, right? So, so they were just kind of toggling between A and B. So
really looking forward to the original iPhone design come back with 3G.
Well, I'd like that. You had two-tone metal back and
that's good stuff. Retro. Like wood paneling maybe on the back.
Anniversary
I don't
edition.
know.
Oh, even better. Faux back is what they call that in sports. I have a Tampa Bay Rays faux back jersey, which basically is what their jersey would look like if they had existed in the 70s.
Yes.
So it's like that.
Yep. There we go.
We'll get the wood paneled iPhone. It's got two. It actually comes with a ringer on the handset, and you have to pick it up and go hello.
Tim talked about wanting to make it out of renewable resources or recyclable stuff.
Yeah,
wood. Come on, not enough wood in Apple's materials.
Why aren't we in charge? Anyway, services revenue. For the first time in a while, I didn't have to. It came close, but I didn't have to change the vertical maximum of my chart, which is set at 21. Because it hit 20.9, so I didn't have to make any adjustments there. It is a record by a tiny amount, but it is the continued pace upward, which has mostly happened. And if I flip quickly over to the growth, you'll see, even though you can see some quarters where it went down a little bit, in terms of year-over-year growth, services has grown every quarter for longer than my chart, for a lot longer than my chart, actually. It's just in the last three, and they will tell you that part of this is about foreign exchange. The reason that those numbers are like that they're down in the single digits instead of being up in the double digits. But still, services marches on, right? And that's the beauty of it is, you sign up for a service and unless you cancel it, they just keep charging your credit card and it just keeps going and building.
Right. Well, and let's not forget that some of the other stuff they were talking about in there, the App Store, obviously still in services, and they had a good quarter with that and with iCloud and Apple Music. And then I thought it was interesting they called out payment services as well. I mean, that's clearly an area that they have been working a lot on recently to roll out new products. And it's no surprise if it's a place that's sort of a bright spot for them because, a credit card, right? Like an Apple credit card, a savings account, a buy now, pay later. You kind of cover all ends of the spectrum with that, right? Because you have the people who is like, well, it's tough times out there right now. I'm going to hold all my money, and save it. Well, we've got a savings account for you. It's like, but I'd like to engage in a little retail therapy and buy something. Well, we've got a credit card for you. Maybe I can't afford that big purchase right now, but I want to sort of spread it out. Good news. We've got buy now, pay later. So they what's great about that payment services thing for them is they get you coming, they get you going. Like pretty much anything you want to do, they have a way to handle it.
So they said services set an all-time record, all-time revenue records in App Store, Apple Music, iCloud, and payment services. Mm-hmm. And then they had quarterly records in video, which I think is also interesting.
It's interesting.
Which means not all time, which is interesting, but how do they define video? I don't know. Apple TV Plus
for Apple TV
rentals
or
rentals, I
guess.
don't even know.
That's weird.
I don't know what's going on there, but still, they had some records, and services continues to make money. Wearable home and accessories, interesting category here too. Again, a similar sort of thing where we've had a flat year and a half, but at previously unattained for Apple heights. And if we quickly flip over to the revenue change, you can see they had a big build for a while there of 30, 40, 50%. And then they came down into the teens. And now we're in this kind of mode where they are basically flat-ish. So down 8, up 10, down 8, down 1 this time. So essentially flat.
Yeah.
Which, given the economic environment, is probably not so terrible. But it's not. It's also not the heights. Wearables is not the huge. It's expanded hugely, but it also seems to have reached a point where until there's something new, they're kind of just going to hover.
The one that caught my ear as they were talking about it was there was a new installed base record for the watch, and 2/3 of the customers buying Apple Watches were new to the platform.
Yeah.
That still continues to sort of blow me away. And I'm curious about what is drawing in customers. Is it's just new regions with people maybe like, I mean, it may be some of a follow on too, right? Like if you've got a lot of these emerging markets where people are buying iPhones now, maybe for a first time, or they're updating their iPhones or whatever. Now the Apple Watch may be an option that it wasn't, 5 years ago when they were buying their last iPhone. So maybe that's got a little bit of a halo effect happening to it.
2/3 of watch purchases and more than half of iPad purchases were new to iPad.
Interesting too.
Not bad.
Yeah.
That's how you increase your install base. And actually something else that they pointed out was that they're at their total subscription number is at 975 million.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they really want to trumpet when they're at 1 billion
paid subscriptions. Yeah.
But
and I believe they said the iPhone install base is well over 1 billion too. I think it hit that a while back ago. So yeah.
They did. These are big numbers.
Yeah, big numbers.
Let me run through some other charts here. Percentage revenue by product line. Just to remind everybody that the iPhone is big. And then the services and then the rest of them. That's just how it is. And services, yeah, it's just that's how it is. Regional, just to break this out really quick. You can see America's down a little bit, China down a little bit, Japan down a little bit, rest of Asia Pacific cropping up a little bit. And it looks like it's Europe, but I've now changed my label to EMEA because we were having that conversation about how it is actually Europe, Middle East, and Africa. And that it actually includes India. So that's the India region is actually Europe. So I think calling it EMEA, and which doesn't even include India in the label, Middle East, which is not.
I love that there's a market, with like more than 1 billion people in it, and it's just lumped into. It's not even broken out,
and it's not even like EMEAI.
Right, exactly.
It's just
not
EMEA
even mentioned. So weird.
Which is a business thing. It's not just an Apple thing
but
to have EMEA, but it's just funny that Europe includes Middle East, Africa, and India. But if we're looking at India,
a little colonialism, little latent colonialism still going on there.
Yeah, it's the Cupertino East India Company reporting these figures.
Yikes.
Well,
yeah,
come for the pie charts, stay for the
topical humor.
Yeah, that's right. Take that, British Empire. Regional year-over-year growth. Again, you can see that EMEA number that was in the positive, where the China and the Americas were not. I don't know how much of this is India versus Europe. Tim Cook is bullish on India. He talked a lot about it. Hey, he saw Mac SE that he didn't talk about, but he was there. And they tried to get more information out of him. I thought it was really funny. I don't know what you thought about the thing that we all talk about, which is like, do you see a parallel with China? And Tim Cook just repeated what he said before, which is there's a growing middle class there, and we're very enthusiastic. It's like, don't compare. There's some politics there too, right? Like, do not compare India to China.
I don't know about your general take on today's call, but I felt like they were even dodgier than usual in answering questions. They were very terse. A lot of times I would tune out for a second and then come back and be like, oh,
they're gone.
They're gone. They've moved on. We're on to the next thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Ooh. Oh, a
Surprise
live
dog.
dog bark. I have a
Surprise dog.
dog, and she mostly doesn't bark, but every now and then she barks. I think maybe I got to use
Does
UPS
she have
package on her.
opinions? do you need to
Oh
do you need
boy.
to mic her or do you need
Well, she
to?
does have a lot of opinions. Most of her opinions are about string cheese, and her
Mm,
opinion is yes, please.
okay.
I also have this China revenue slide just because sometimes the China revenue is interesting. It was down 3 year over year. Wasn't that interesting? And oh, those are the charts. That's
Those
it.
are the
Those are all the
charts.
charts. Any other thoughts you've got about what we witnessed?
I thought interesting, they obviously don't have to provide the kind of guidance that they used to.
Right.
They've decided potentially they will never provide guidance again, maybe, who knows. But I thought it was interesting, and they did clarify this later on. Luca forecasted basically revenue performance similar, and that was in a year over year basis, basically. So next quarter, they're
Right.
expecting to look a lot like this quarter, which is to say, we're probably not going to see big gains. We're probably going to see sort of, modest to stable, maybe a couple small down numbers. But
and
yeah,
and maybe flat to down, less than 5% year over year, right?
right. Yeah. So not much to say about that other than they are expecting this, macroeconomic environment probably to continue. It seems like, yeah, that was kind of the other big thing that jumped out at me.
So 80 billion in
Shame.
revenue.
What a shame.
What are they? Yeah, what are they even?
Uh,
Yeah. Well, I mean, these are the less interesting quarters, right? They have their more interesting quarters, and the holiday quarter is the most interesting of all of them. But they are still playing at this very high level. I mean, that's the thing, is that when you're in the 90s or in the 80s, I mean, they didn't used to be anywhere near there. That really is a big change.
and
And now they're there. They're sort of like hanging out there.
the topicality of questions was, I think, interesting today too. Their answers were probably a little, as I said, more dodgy than usual. Tim was asked about AI,
Oh yes.
and he was very sort of like, oh, well, you really got to think about it, and there's some stuff that needs to get worked out, but it could be very interesting.
Yeah, it
which
could be
is
very, but we're
sure.
on it. We got lots
Oh
of
yeah,
stuff that
fall
we use it.
detection and crash detection and all
Yeah.
this stuff that we use. And I think
The
this is a
photos
good
team
point.
is like, what are we?
We're chopped
We've
liver.
been detecting objects for years now.
I think it is a good point though, because people have gotten really seized by the flashiness of things like ChatGPT and the AI art stuff, and that's very user oriented in some way, or like it's very direct interaction, right? Like you go to an AI and you type in a thing and you get a result, right? Whereas Apple has really treated its AI like this is a tool that we use to enhance these things that we want to do. And I think it goes to the point that we both talked about in the past about why aren't you just like slap that Chat GPT in for Siri? It's like, well, because it doesn't do the things that you need Siri to do, and it possibly makes stuff up. So very, very careful about how he's navigating that. And then they also asked him about, and we talked about this a little bit, but the expansion in payments ecosystem over time and how they viewed that. Are these standalone products, or are they just things that bring people in? And I thought it was very kind of canny for Tim. He compared it basically to the stuff they've done with health.
Yeah.
And say, like, the same way we're treating like people, living healthier and trying to be more fit and all that, we're looking at financial health, which is a great way to pitch it, I think, and it makes a lot of sense from the way that Apple handles like its sort of core mission and core value stuff. But it also completely sidesteps the question of, yeah, but you're a business, you're basically dealing in finance, like, where are you going with this, right? Like, Tim Cook was very clear never to say, like, also it makes us a ton of money.
Yeah.
Whereas we're sitting there going like, yeah, you're talking around it a little bit there, but it is an interesting thing from an Apple like design perspective.
That's Apple in a nutshell, right? They talk about they in a very short space of time in the call, they talk about how they care about making the world a better place, and also about just how large their gross margins are.
Also, we make a ton of money.
Yeah,
those two
I mean,
things. That's just that's how it works. You make great things and
the
you make
Apple
a lot of money.
business model is we care and we have our beliefs, and also we make a ton of money. So
are those connected?
don't
Maybe
mess around with
Maybe not.
the system. I used Whisper AI to do my transcript that you can find on 6colors of the whole call. I gotta say, so I ran locally on my Mac. I gotta say, the accuracy of I used the large model this time, large English model, staggeringly good. Like I made almost no changes, and it used to be I would do these speech to transcript things, and then I would have to like it would be like iPhone would be wrong, or iMac, and it would be like EYEMAC, and like it didn't have enough context to understand, especially proper names for Apple stuff, or business terminology. OINE was often like wine or something. And let me tell you, it nailed it. It nailed all those things. There were a couple places where it didn't quite do it right, but I was mostly just doing paragraph breaks and a little bit of punctuation and occasionally a word. There were a couple places where a word hiccuped a little bit, but and I think that what I really learned is the context, that as a human being reading a sentence, while I was listening, I was seeing punctuation and going, why did they do it that way? And realizing that a little bit later on that actually was where they were going. That sentence didn't go in a way that I expected.
Right.
They actually added another clause on because it's spoken word. And the old timey transcripts didn't look that far ahead, right? They weren't thinking holistically about the sentence. They were trying to kind of like do it based on maybe tone of voice. Just couldn't be more impressed by it. I rigged up a bunch of automations to try to make my job easier. Those completely failed. So back to the drawing board with those. But I did manage to make it work, and I think maybe I even set a record. I think the whole transcript was done like 8 minutes after
Wow.
the call was done. So I need to make it a little less makeshift, but it totally is amazing. Even the names of the analysts were almost entirely right, which is
amazing.
Shocking.
Do you think that they trained the large language model on this is like freely available
honestly
audio. There's no reason you couldn't actually.
I mean, there's a Washington Post report that said that they use 6 colors as one of their training things, and it's like I had that moment where I thought, did they train the model on the 6 colors transcript of the Apple analyst calls? Because it's really good, like shockingly good. So I need to automate that process a little bit more. Or maybe there'll be a tool. Like there are tools out there. The part that I miss is that having the editors that connect directly with the audio and the text with the audio is super easy and helpful. But having the quality of this is too good, and having it run local on my machine is too great. So I just need to try and spiff that up a little bit. But it was still pretty good. And also for those following at home, I've been trying to design an automation that looks at the PDF of the release and pulls out the numbers. So all I have to do is download the PDF of the earnings release, right click, choose this, and then literally it switches me to numbers, and I do paste, and they're in there. Totally didn't work. There were numbers. Some of them were right. Many of them were wrong. Back to the drawing board. So
AI will handle that eventually.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's the thing. I'll just say, hey, AI, just do those charts for me, and then there will be. But we're not there yet. So more to be done on that front. Yeah, I think that's it. I think that's the story from here. I thought there was a chance that this was going to be like this was a bad Apple. And like, again, it's Apple. Everybody's going to shrug it off because they're still so huge, but it wasn't even that. It was more like oh, what a relief. I imagine the markets will react positively to this because it was sort of like, what a relief. Apple's okay.
They were up after hours, I believe, in what I saw. So yeah.
I think a lot of, in my perfunctory CNBC watching for the 30 minutes before the results come out, everybody seemed to be wanting and hoping that Apple would give them some good news, and I think that this qualifies as that. So, all right, well, when we do this again, it'll be post WWDC, and who knows what the heck the world will look like then. But
very different.
For now, that's what we got. Dan, thank you for looking at charts with me.
Always a pleasure. Nothing I like more than looking at a good chart.
And thanks to everybody out there for watching / listening to this quick reaction to Apple financial results. Get much more about all of this at 6colors.com. Check it out. That's our website. And we'll see you next time. Bye, Dan.
Bye, Jason.